How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to go ahead and start deploying the Mgmt ESXi hosts. Now, my goal was originally to deploy VMware Workstation, vCenter Server instead of VMware Workstation. Well, I did test it out, and the deployment did not go so well. So I'm going to switch gears, and I've made a couple of modifications. So let me go ahead and pull up our topology real quick. And what I'm basically going to do is I have this additional ESXi host right here for the management host 1, which is going to be just another virtual machine that we're going to run. We're going to give it 4 CPUs and 12 gigs of RAM, just enough to run one vCenter server on it. So this will be our management host, and we're going to put that into the management cluster. And then each one of these hosts over here will be our compute clusters. So this blue line, technically, or this rectangle that's right here, let's pretend that there's technically a second one. And I'm actually going to take this guy here. I'm going to bring this guy over here. So he will run on itself, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy. I'm going to copy and paste it. And I'm going to drag him across all 3 hosts, just like this. And bring this guy up just a little bit so that he sits on top of, like this. And bring him to the left, just so the little box is just inside of the bigger box. Because this ESXi host and vCenter server that's deployed on this host will be responsible for how these 3 ESXi hosts work inside of this cluster once we get to a cluster. We're not there yet, but we will be. And we're going to do the same thing with this host up here. We're going to go ahead and make him a little bit smaller, like so. Bring him down just a touch. And then we're going to copy and paste this one. We're not going to deploy vCenter 2 for a little while, but just so that we understand the process. Go ahead and bring this up just a touch, like so. And then scoot this up, and then bring that to the left. Just so the little box is just inside of the big box. Okay, cool. So I'm going to save that. That's going to be our new deployment method. I'm going to go ahead and deploy the new ESXi host and go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. I'm going to go ahead and create a new virtual machine, and I'm going to walk you through how to deploy vCenter server on this in this deployment here. I'm going to just go ahead and get the ESXi host deployed real quick and get that process knocked out really quick. So I'm going to browse just so you guys are able to follow me along at home. I'm going to go ahead and say make a new folder. This will be our Mgmt host 1, and we're going to call this Mgmt host 1. Click next. We're going to go ahead and give it a 250 gig hard drive because we're going to need enough space to install the vCenter server. I'm going to click next. I'm going to modify the hardware. This will be I'm going to go ahead and bump this up to be 12 gigs of RAM. And we're going to go ahead and give it 4 CPUs. And then the adapter, we're going to go ahead and just give it a bridge. We're not going to deploy onto an iSCSI storage right now. We'll take a look at doing a storage vMotion in an upcoming video. So I'm going to go ahead and click on close and finish. And then I'm going to go through the deployment of getting the ESXi host all squared away. You guys don't have to worry about that. So now we have the management host. I will pause the video and I'll bring you guys back in when we're at the point of doing the vCenter server deployment. All right, so ironically, after I started deploying and I went through and got management host 1 deployed, I realized the error of my way. So originally when I was trying to deploy the vCenter Server Appliance inside of VMware Workstation, which is a supported configuration, I kept on pointing the DNS server pointing the VCSA to a DNS server that was not local to itself, and there was no entry for it, and it kept on bugging out. So I realized the error of my way. I'm still going to deploy vCenter Server 1 on management host 1 and show you what that looks like, so you guys can see that process and go from there. But I'm also going to deploy a VMware Workstation so we can have an actual VMware Workstation deployment, so you guys can see how that comes into play as well. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to the documents page here, and we don't have the VCSA here, so that means I have to I want to deploy it from this server right here. So if I come over here to the storage and go to documents, all we have is this. So I actually need to copy the contents of the folder over. So if I go to this PC, I don't have the drive mapped, so I've got to go in here and add it. So I'm going to pause, pull that up, and show you what that looks like. Alright, so here is the VCSA 6.7. If I double click inside of here, you have all the details you need to roll this with. What I'm going to do is, when you're deploying to VMware Workstation, you need to double click inside of here, and here is the OVF file to deploy inside of VMware Workstation. We're going to actually need to come up to here and copy this entire folder. So we're going to go here, copy, and then on this PC we're going to go to documents, and then we're going to paste it right here. Because we're going to point to the management host, so we're going to point to this guy right here. We're going to deploy the vCenter server on management host 1, which is a VM, and then we're going to deploy it, but the bits, all the installation media and things like that, need to be on the device you're installing the vCenter Server Appliance from. If you don't, you run into a lot of problems. So if the bits are on a remote share, whether it's an NFS share or whatever the case might be, it always bugs out on me whenever I try to deploy it where the installation media doesn't exist locally. If you have to go over a network share to pull it in, it just doesn't, the redirection doesn't work very well. It gets kind of kludgy. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. So let me go ahead and minimize this process. So this is going to take some time to copy. So I'm going to pause until this is completely done, and we'll go from there. Alright, now that we have the installation to this point, what we get to go do is expand the VCSA folder and then go down to the UI installer, double click inside of here, and go Win32. And you're going to want to scroll down until you find the installer. So we're going to go ahead and double click on that, and it's going to pop up the VMware vCenter Server Appliance installer. So we need to go ahead and click on install. We're going to go ahead and click on, this is going to be stage 1 of the deploy appliance. We're going to accept the license agreement. We're going to deploy a PSC with an embedded services controller. Click on next, and then it says ESXi host or vCenter server name. We're going to type in the IP address of the ESXi host. If you enter the FQDN, I've had it backfire on me more times than I care to count. However, I have heard some stories where if you go into a reverse lookup and you right click here, go new zone, click on next, and do a primary zone, and then you come in here and you do a 10.255.1.0. This is supposed to fix any type of reverse lookups that are there. So we're just going to go ahead and push that through, even though we're not really going to be using it. I'm going to put in here 10.255.1.30. And then it's going to be root as our username and then password as our password. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. So we should get a prompt for a certificate warning. We're going to go ahead and say yes, that's fine. And now we needed to define our target size. How big of an appliance are we going to deploy? So I'm going to go ahead and say this is going to be vCSA1.lab.local. Even though we don't technically need it to be .lab.local, we're going to put it in there for good measure. I'm going to go ahead and provide a password. Click on next. The deployment side is going to be tiny, which is going to be 2 CPUs and 10 gigs of RAM, 300 gigs of storage. And we're going to go ahead and click on Next. Then it's going to ask us what storage do we want to use. And right now, there's actually not enough storage on the storage that we've selected. So we're going to have to enable thin disk mode. So it's going to thin provision. But if we wanted to, we could actually install on a new vSAN cluster containing the target host. So if we wanted to deploy vCenter server inside of vSAN, we could. We will be taking a look at vSAN in this series of videos, but right now it's not deployed. I'm going to click Next. And we're going to, what subnet do you want to apply this to? We're going to go ahead and apply it to VM network, because that's going to be the 10.255.1 network that we're going to be using. The FQDN is going to be VCSA 1.lab.local. The IP address here will be 10.255.1.26 with a /24 prefix length, 10.255.1.1 as our default gateway, and 10.255.1.1.21 as our DNS server. I'm going to click on Next and Finish. So now it's going to go ahead and start pushing this out to that ESXi host, the management host 1. And as this process kicks off and deploys, once the host is, or the VCSA or the appliance is pushed out to the host and boots up, we'll then be able to, from here, pull up a web browser, or actually inside of the installer, we'll be able to go to stage 2 or part 2 and finish the implementation by setting up the SSO domain and all that good stuff that goes along with it. So I'm going to pause until this process is complete. This will take some time. If you're in a hurry, don't be. So I'll be back in just a moment. Alright, so our deployment of the VCSA with an embedded services controller is actually pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and we can do this manually through the website if we were to navigate to here. I'm not going to do that though. I'm going to go ahead and go to stage 2 by clicking continue. Give that a couple minutes and we will go through the stage 2 process, which is going to be setting up the appliance and going through all that to get ready to deploy it fully. So this is going to be setup of the vCenter Server Appliance. I'm going to click on Next. And we're going to synchronize time with ESXi host, and we're going to turn SSH on so that when we go to do vCenter server high availability, we'll be able to do that. I'm going to click Next. And I'm going to go ahead and do a SSO configuration. I'm going to go ahead and specify the domain. So vSphere.local. And the password is going to be the one we've been using. Capital P @SSW0RD. And again, click on Next. I'm not going to join the CEIP. Simply for the fact that, you know, I really don't want to be sending VMware any more information that they already have. I'm going to click on Next. Now, what it's going to tell us is that we have everything laid out the way we need to. The next thing for us to go do would be to click Finish. It's going to tell us that once we pause, or once we won't be able to pause or stop the install once it starts. We're going to say, yep, sure, no problem. Now, if everything has been done correctly, and you've got everything laid out the way you need to, you should be able to, when you get to the beginning part here, there's going to be the initial step-up process, so the VMware Authentication Framework. You're going to start that. Then there's Identity Management. If you can get past that, then you know you're in really good shape. So I'm going to pause the video here until we get a little bit further along, and then we'll, if there's any problems, we'll identify them, talk about how to resolve them and things like that. But as far as I'm aware, everything that I've done up to this point should work. So we should get through this and then the Identity Management and then finish up the install. Alright, well, after a lengthy amount of time waiting for the install to happen, it does take a while. We can either click in here and go to this URL, or we can click on Close. I'm going to go ahead and close out the installer, and as you can see, it pops up right away. We're going to go ahead and click Close on that and then continue to the website. I'm actually going to close out Internet Explorer because it's unfortunately the default web browser here. I'm going to go ahead and close this, minimize this, and I'm going to open up another web browser tab, and I'm going to type in here vCSA1.lab.local and hit the enter key. So that should redirect me. I'm going to go click on advanced and accept the risk and continue, and we're going to go ahead and launch the vSphere client. This will take a couple seconds for it to get there because it's going to have to redirect and things like that. Don't be in a hurry. So this will take a couple of moments to pull up. So once this does occur, so actually that happened rather quickly. What I'm going to go ahead and do is in here, I'm going to type in administrator at vSphere.local. Come down here and enter the password. And since we're in Firefox, as soon as I click on login, it should ask me if I want to save the credentials, which I will. We'll give that a couple of moments to go ahead and log in. And then once we're logged in, this is the part that takes a while. So it'll log in, it'll do its thing, so on and so forth. I'm actually going to pause until this process is complete. Alright, well that took a couple of minutes to execute, so I'm going to go ahead and at this point in time, if we wanted to go ahead and mess around with licensing and things like that, we could. If you have a license that you purchased or you're using an evaluation copy, you can do that. We're going to be good for 60 days. Now if you look over here on the right, we're going to have an additional tab option here that we're going to be able to click on. Go to the right where it says plug in VMware vSphere, vSAN H5 client plugin has been successfully deployed. I'm going to go ahead and say refresh browser. We will be deploying vSAN in a later set of videos, but for right now, this is basically where we're at. So this gets us squared away where we need to be. I'm going to go ahead and close this guy out, and we're good to go. Now it's saying that there is CPU exhaustion on VCSA 1. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that. I'm not really too concerned about utilization at the moment. So we're still trying to pull in data and stuff like that. This information will eventually populate, but remember we are in a virtual lab, so things are going to be a little bit slow to populate and stuff like that. You'll notice that we're getting some weirdness showing up here. So this is the vCenter Server Appliance. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a little bit of a tour real quick. Whether you're using the Windows-based or you're using the Linux-based appliance is irrelevant. You get the same look and feel. So just be aware of that. So on the summary tab, obviously we have a bunch of information here at the top. If we wanted to deploy, the version, the build we've got running, if we wanted to use vSphere Update Manager, we could do that. If we're running vCenter HA, we could see what's going on, and we will be taking a look at that in a later video, so on and so forth, what the operations are going on. Right now we have no hosts or virtual machines mapped, so as soon as we start adding hosts and virtual machines, the information over here will start to populate. Now down here at the bottom we have recent tasks and alarms, so we can see the CPU exhaustion. If I wanted to say, you know what, I really don't care, let's go ahead and just minimize that, we can get rid of it completely, and that's going to give us a little bit more real estate to work with. From the monitor tab, if we wanted to monitor the operations, we have a bunch of different things that we can take a look at. So if you get an alert and you're like, well, what does this alert mean? You can dive into the task events and things like that and see what is actually happening. If you want to click on configure, there's a lot of different things that you can do here. A general tab, obviously, if we want to edit any of the details here, we could. So on and so forth. We have licensing if we want to adjust licensing. Right now we're good until the early May 2021. So right now we have basically everything that we need to have ready to go. We can deploy vCenter HA, workflow orchestration engine, storage appliance, multi-hypervisor manager. A lot of really cool stuff is good to go. Right now we're using one instance. There is no license associated. If we wanted to associate a license, we would actually have to go to actions. I'm sorry, up here at the menu, not at the actions. Up here at the menu and come down here to administration, add a license, and then go from there. If we want to go to actions, on a per option here on the left, you can go to actions and a lot of the things will update. If you want to do update manager, if you want to associate a license, if you want to create a new data center, a new folder, a new distributed switch, these are all things that you could do as we're playing around with vCenter and things like that. From a permissions perspective, obviously if you want to adjust how certain roles and capabilities are being dictated, that's where this would come into play. Right now we don't have any data centers deployed, but if we did, this is where you'd be able to see them. From hosts and clusters belong to data centers. So think of the vCenter Server Appliance, this guy right up here, as your top level or parent level object, and that data centers would become a child object of vCenter, and then hosts and clusters will become child objects of data centers. And then VMs and data stores and networks will become child objects of hosts and clusters, so on and so forth. So from left to right, you've got child object 1, child object 2, child object 3 for VMs, data stores, and networks, because these are applicable to hosts. Hosts belong to clusters. Hosts and clusters can belong to data centers. Over here we have linked vCenter systems. If we are running a single sign-on domain or an SSO domain, you can actually manage multiple vCenter servers from a single pane of glass. So we have VCSA 1.lab.local here. If I was to add an additional vCenter server, whether it's VCSA 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be, if you were to all join those to the same single sign-on domain, you could log into VCSA 1 and then manage all of the other vCenter server deployments from one single pane of glass. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't for the organization. It's up to you and how you want to do that. Extensions, we have a couple of options here. We have vService Manager, vSphere ESXi Agent Manager. We're not going to be really playing around with those at all. And when we come down here to updates, if we wanted to play around with Update Manager, we could come in here and basically create a compliance. We could figure out who's doing what. If we want to upgrade an ESXi host from one version of ESXi to the next, you can do that through vSphere Update Manager. It's actually pretty cool. You can run a remediation pre-check. You know, does this host have these characteristics? If yes, great. If no, you can remediate it and then push whatever updates you need to, whether they're not patched correctly, whether they're on the wrong version of ESXi, so on and so forth. So just to help you guys understand the logic flow to how all this stuff comes into play, let's go ahead and pull up, go ahead and exit out of my pen tool real quick and pull that back up. So the way this will work, if we were to come in here and go to black and go to a medium thickness, if I was to come down here and break this down, let me go ahead and, I don't know how that happened. If I come down here, if you look over here, which we're going to do out of the gate, is we're going to have two different data centers. We're going to say DC and 1, which will be management. And then we'll have the management host host 1, like so. And then we're going to have DC2, which will be for compute or comp. We'll put in here virt host 1, 2, and 3. And that will give us two different data centers to work with. These are just logical groupings for the most part. So we would have one data center here and then one data center here. And then you'd have your virt host here and virt host here. If you wanted to add another VCSA, let's say we added VCSA 2.lab.local, we could add in another data center, so say DC3. Or we could, instead of making this DC1 making this DC2, we could make this DC1 for compute and 1 for management. So you can do it however you want to. The logical architecture and the logical hierarchy that you assign to your vCenter implementation is completely up to you. There obviously is best practices. I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can do it. It's up to you and how you want to execute. And so we have a lot of things to cover when it comes to how the vCenter Server Appliance is used. This is going to be where we spend the majority of our time throughout the rest of the series, is talking about how the vCenter Server Appliance works and really how it all comes together. Because there's a lot of things to talk about when it comes to vCenter Server. Remember, this is going to be where a lot of your other things are going to come into play. For example, if you were to deploy NSX, or if you were to deploy desktop mobility, if you were to play around with vCloud Foundation, or whatever other type of scenario you want to roll out with, ESXi hosts and vCenter Server are going to be the things that you're going to be interacting with the most when it comes to these deployments. So have fun with it. Don't let it get you, take it one step at a time. There's a lot to cover, so we're going to be taking a look at this step by step as we move forward. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you guys for stopping by and hanging out with me in this video. And until next time, guys, take it easy.